Hi everyone, my name is Gail English. I'm a middle childhood major, and my topic for this research project was question asking in the classroom, and it was advised by Dr. Christina Miller. So my research question was, what are the factors that causes a student to ask or not ask questions in the classroom? And I became interested with this because I have always noticed that I am a pretty consistent question asker in the classroom. And then I have always noticed that there are some students who are not consistent question askers and almost who never ask questions at all. And I was just curious to see what factors cause a student to ask questions, to not ask questions, and then using that information to see how a teacher can create an environment of question asking in the classroom, since we obviously all want students to ask questions in the classroom. So I had two different methods of data collection that I was able to implement. The first one was a questionnaire. I gave this to 23 fourth grade students in my homeroom of students that I taught in my student teaching placement. And this asked two multiple choice questions, which you'll see on the next slide. And then the next method was observation of question asking. So over the course of 3 days, I had a class roster and I did a tally mark system to keep track of which students ask questions and how often they ask questions. And then I was able to use that information to later compare the frequency of question asking to gender and to ability level. I based ability level based off of the students' grades for that current quarter in that subject. So this was math in quarter 2. So based off of their quarter 2 grades for math, I decided what a grade for a student would be if they're advanced, basic, or struggling. So I was able to compare the question asking frequency to gender and then their ability level. So this is a questionnaire I was talking about. There are two questions. The first one is, when I'm confused about something we're doing in class, I normally, and they had to choose one statement that best fits them. So what do they do typically when they're confused in class? And the second question is, when I'm confused about something we're doing in class and I decide not to ask for help, it's normally because, and they had to choose which, any of the statements that they agreed with. So they could circle all that applied. So when they're confused about something and they do not ask a question, why is that? What's holding them back? So here are the results for that questionnaire. This is question 1, which again asked, when I'm confused in class, what do I typically do? How do I respond? And there were 5 different answer options and they had to choose one. And I found that 82% of the students believed that they would either ask a teacher or a peer for help when they're confused. So either answer option A or B. They would ask someone for help, which is pretty profound because 82% of the students answered that. And then 17% of the students answered that they would either work on the problem independently, try to figure it out by themselves, or skip the problem and move on. It was all pretty interesting. That's a big difference there. And then question 2 again asked, when I'm confused about something in class and I do not ask a question, why do I not ask a question? What's holding me back? And they could choose all of the options that they agreed with. So that's why the percentages do not add up to 100%. And I found that the most commonly chosen options were A, B, and C, which all have to, if you look, they all have to deal with some type of fear. So whether that's a fear of judgment from a classmate, whether that's a fear of how they appear to other students, if they're afraid of looking unintelligent, or if that's a fear that their teacher is going to be upset or frustrated with them for asking the question. Those were the most commonly chosen options, with an exception of option E, which is, I feel like I ask questions whenever I'm confused. 57% of the students at least chose answer E for at least one of their options. So 57% of the students feel that they ask questions whenever they're confused. And then after that, the next most commonly chosen options were A, B, and C, which have to show some type of fear of judgment or not looking smart in front of their friends, or a fear that their teacher is going to be frustrated with them. Here are the results for the observation that I did of question asking in the classroom. And I found, after looking at the question asking frequency and then comparing it to ability level, I found that struggling and advanced students asked, on average, slightly more questions than basic students. So this was over, again, the course of 3 days. And I saw that struggling students asked an average of 2.25 questions over the course of 3 days. So struggling students asked on average 2.25 questions over the course of 3 days. Advanced students asked on average 2.14 questions over the course of 3 days. And the basic students asked 1.58 questions over the course of 3 days. So there is a little bit of a difference there, which is interesting. And then when I compared the frequency of question asking to the students' gender, I found that female students asked an average of 1.85 questions over the course of 3 days compared to 1.9 questions over the course of 3 days. So there is only a difference of 0.05 questions. That's the only difference. So I'd like to talk about my limitations because that plays a huge factor in this project. So my main limitation, which caused a lot of other problems or smaller limitations, was just the lack of time. And because of the school closure, there was a lot that I could not do. And the plans I had initially, I was not able to implement. So I probably was only able to go maybe halfway through of the plans I had already. So the lack of time, it affected the sample size. So I was only able to collect data from my homeroom class. And I had hoped to do all of this, but with the other class that I teach, which would have doubled my sample size and made it more diverse. The lack of time also affected the observational time that I wanted to have. I wanted to spend more than just 3 days observing students and seeing when they ask questions and who the kids are that ask questions. So I didn't have as much observational time, and I also didn't get to do one-on-one interviews, which I thought would have been very beneficial to see how students felt about question asking and to have them with their own words share if they felt like what I was doing in the classroom to create that environment if it was helping. And then the biggest part is just the post-observational changes that I wanted to implement and never got to. So my hope initially was to take the information I just shared and to use that information to create change in the classroom so that I could try to create an environment where students ask more questions. I wasn't able to do that because of the lack of time. So my main limitation really just all stemmed from my lack of time. So based off of that, I do have a couple implications for teaching just from what I saw and observed. So I would first like to say that this group of students is the youngest group of students I've ever got to observe or work with. I've always been in a 7th, 8th, or 9th grade classroom. So these students are in 4th grade, and I honestly was shocked at how many questions they already did ask in the classroom and how many of them do feel comfortable asking questions. And whether or not that has something to do with the age or the district they're in, I'm not sure, but I was surprised. So I would say my first implication, what I learned is that all sets of students are going to be different. You can't assume, if you've only seen students that don't ask questions, you can't assume that when you move to a different position or a new group of students that they're also not going to ask a lot of questions. There's so many factors. How well the students know each other, if they already are all friends, their age, ability level, classroom environment, etc. There's so many different things that impact how many questions a student is going to ask. So don't assume that they're going to ask questions when they're confused or vice versa. And the next implication is that an environment of question asking does have to be created no matter the circumstance. So even in my classroom where students did ask more questions than I ever had seen before, that can always grow. There are always going to be students who do not ask questions. And I think you can see that in the college level or the elementary level, that there's always going to be questions that are not asked. And so then at that point, there's going to be students who are going to be more behind because they didn't get to ask that question, so they're probably confused. So I have just learned that in my future teaching, this is something I'm going to be very interested in. And I'm very excited to get to apply what I already did, maybe give the same questionnaire and get to do one-on-one interviews and see how my students feel about asking questions and use that information to create a classroom where students ask more questions, because we always need more question asking in the classroom, and there's always going to be kids that are behind. So this is just something I feel is very worthwhile. And while I'm sad that this was not able to be carried on, it's something that I'm still going to investigate and look into in my future teaching. So thank you guys for watching, and I've had a lot of fun with this. Thanks.